just dominant. Just an absolutely dominant performance by your Minnesota Vikings, beating the Green Bay Packers 23-7. We're going to break it down here on the Locked On Vikings podcast. Ooh-wee!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. Show is on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. What a glorious day it is. It's Victory Monday, baby. We love a Victory Monday here on the Locked On Vikings podcast, especially when it's Victory Monday following an absolute spanking of the Green Bay Packers. We love to see it. So I'm going to break down some of the stuff that stood out to me. We'll get deeper into this as the week goes on too. But first, let's just recap the broad strokes. So the Vikings come out swinging. They go down, score on their very first drive, and it looked like the Packers were going to do just about the same thing, but they get stuffed on 4th and 1, enabled by a really great stop on 3rd down by Harrison Smith. Jordan Hicks overruns a play. A.J. Dillon looks like he's going to waltz in, and Harrison Smith knocks A.J. Dillon, stops him clean in his tracks, and that is a hard guy to do that to. That's a great play. And then the 4th down, Harrison Phillips splits a double team beautifully. If you didn't see any preseason or you weren't watching camp, you saw what we've been talking about with Harrison Phillips and Dalvin Tomlinson as well. Dalvin Tomlinson lived in the backfield. And that's not even getting into Zadarius Smith and Danielle Hunter. The front was off the rails today. Anyways, speaking of, Zadarius Smith ends up getting the tackle, but it probably doesn't work if Harrison Phillips doesn't also split that double team. Like, I think both those guys need credit for that. Apparently that was a read option play, the 4th and 1 stop. That was such a big turning point in the game. Apparently that was a read option play that Aaron Rodgers read wrong, that he said after the game. He said, yeah, I should have read. And looking at it, yeah, he should have kept if he had the option to do that, because Zadarius Smith played it really far inside. He would have waltzed right in. Sucks to suck. But also on that drive, you had the big Christian Watson play. This is delicious that Christian Watson dropped that pass. There was so much bluster over the draft about the 2 in-division trades that Kwesi made. Now, the Lions trade, I kind of agreed. I thought that wasn't a good trade, at least value-wise. He didn't get enough back. It worked out okay because they got Lewis Seen, and it seems like they were pretty high on him. But I thought the value of that trade was like below market, and I didn't like that. And then the Packer trade happened, and I thought that was a bend you over the barrel fleecing of the Packers. I thought Kwesi got way more than he ever should have gotten for that trade. But people were really mad because they saw it as allowing Green Bay to come up and fix their wide receiver problem. And if that, I don't think that they planned the things this specifically, but on your very first play from scrimmage, going out for a bomb to Christian Watson, who, by the way, cooked Patrick Peterson on a route. Peterson lost his footing and was way behind. Kind of the only bad rep he had. There were some other coverage busts. I'm going to put a pin in those and get to those later in the week because I want to see what the full coverage calls were and see if I can't suss out what exactly happened. But that rep was a bad rep on Peterson, and Watson has all kinds of space, and then he drops it, which is like exactly his thing. He had like a 12% drop rate or something completely obscene in college. And it's why I wasn't very excited about him in the draft. And that's why I kind of chuckled when the Packers traded up with a division rival at a premium to go take this guy that I think I had him as a low 3rd because it's like, well, he can't catch. Like, that's Troy Williamson. He's FCS Troy Williamson. And then he just has the most Troy Williamson play possible, just wide open, can't bring it in. And he didn't get targeted again. He got one end around, and he didn't get targeted again until well after the game was out of hand. That deliciously ironic, especially if there was any part of the Packers or even Aaron Rodgers that was doing that to try to be petty. Again, I don't think you can do it that specifically. Like, I don't think that that's a way that like offenses will or progressions will work. They don't just say we're going to do a shot to Watson right away. Especially it's the kind of thing you decide after you see how that route went. But delicious. Anyways, the Vikings then just sort of clamped down. There was one touchdown drive the Packers had in the whole rest of the game. And I think one of the things that really enabled the Packers offense in that drive, and really the only pitch that they had, was stuff to the flats using a play action fake to get the linebackers to play up. Because the linebackers have to play run first. They always will. And then you can send somebody out to the flat, and essentially you have to have like a crap ton of range. Otherwise, you're going to be able to get like Aaron Jones have the edge, and like that play is going to be there, and they got a bunch of explosives that way. But like, you can't make a living on only that, and eventually you have to go deep. But the broadcast kind of called it like umbrella coverage. I think that's a really old word, but it's the Fangio too high shell thing. That, you know, when it is a run play, the safeties are part of the fit and they just have to insert and they just have to come downhill real fast. And that's a really hard job. And they did okay with it, but it meant some run plays went for 7 yards. There was a lot of successful runs. And that's just like super okay because it means they can never go deep. And I don't think they had any deep completions that weren't just like straight up coverage busts. And that's why the Packers only scored 7 points, because their offense had to go through A.J. Dillon and Robert Tonyan. That's not an NFL offense, and they just didn't have any star power. Alan Lazard didn't play. It should be noted. Elton Jenkins, David Bakhtiari didn't play. And I'm sure Packers fans will say all of that is a valid excuse that the Vikings were a lot healthier. And they were, but I don't think it makes that big of a difference where the Packers offense was held to just 7. There's something really wrong in Green Bay there, and I don't think Alan Lazard is the kind of guy that comes in and fixes that. I mean, he's not Devontae Adams. They missed Devontae Adams. They didn't really replace him. And I think that's going to hurt them this year, which is great news to us. Isn't that fun? So I want to talk a lot about Justin Jefferson and especially Kirk Cousins. I thought Kirk Cousins had one of the best games I've seen him have here. Really encouraging stuff from Cousins, especially some of the way that he succeeded is really like assuages a lot of the concerns that I have had about him for years. And if he can keep that up, look out. I gotta admit that I was wrong about a few things. All right. I gotta eat a little crow, and that's okay. Nothing wrong with that. But first, we know as fans of a football team how important it is to protect your expensive stuff. All right. You know, like things like your quarterback or things like an engagement ring. Protect that kind of stuff. All right. All sorts of things can go wrong if you have, say, an extravagant plan to propose to that special someone or just give a gift. You're going to be in a hot air balloon or something, or in a canoe like you see on the screen in front of you, and that thing can just flip and suddenly, oops, or it can fall through the cracks of a dock. All sorts of bad things can happen. So why don't you just get some insurance for that? Jewelry and watch insurance by Brightco. That's BRITECO. It's the fastest, easiest, and cheapest way to cover your butt with the best jewelry insurance in the business. It's so easy. You can get covered with like 2 minutes on the phone. It's $5 a month. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. If you didn't check it out over the whole offseason, I would love to direct you to my history documentary. It's a 7-part documentary series. It is all out. It is all on my Patreon. It is all free to watch. You can find it at patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. It details the entire history of the Vikings. It is 7 episodes and a prologue totaling 7 hours of content. Real great thing to pass the time between one game and the next. So continuing on here, let's talk offense. The defense really won because pressure beat up the Packers defensive line and because high shelled coverage forced them into this hyper conservative game plan. And they just didn't have a way out of that because they just didn't have the horses. Great stuff. We love it. Other side of the ball. That was supposed to, like, the Packers defense is supposed to be one of the best units in the league going into the season. Like, they were projected to be one of the best defenses in the league. And yeah, the Vikings only put up 23, but a lot of that comes from, spending basically the entire second half up by a wide margin. And you're sort of trying to do more kill clock more than anything else. Not that they weren't going hyper conservative like Zimmer, and actually staying aggressive is probably going to be a story of the week, but you're not like taking shot plays, right? And part of it too is just the second half dried up a little bit as the Packers adjusted to what killed them in the first half, but it was too little too late. And what killed them in the first half, his name is Justin Jefferson. What a game, a $184. I believe that's a career high for him. In most of it in the first half, and just running free downfield all the time. Kirk Cousins found him. Again, we'll get to him in a second. But first with Jefferson, there's so much. I mean, there was this crazy good route against Eric Stokes, and Stokes had a catastrophic game. But crazy good route against Stokes that got a ton of separation. He had a lot of, but a lot of this was just like easy money. Like a lot of this was easy assignments for Justin Jefferson, like easy routes. And you're up against a linebacker, you're just finding the hole in the zone. He can do that in his sleep. And when you take a player who is that good and you give him the easy mode assignments, then you can really get video game numbers. Like go, if you're a Madden player, go play Madden on rookie. That's going to be how this game felt for Justin Jefferson. And not shade to the Packers or whatever, but I mean, kind of shade to Joe Barry, because Kevin O'Connell danced around him in circles. And a lot of this was motion. Justin Jefferson said after the game, motion was the word that kept coming out of his mouth for like, how did you do it? How'd you always get so open? And that motion made it really hard for the Packers to dictate matchups. One of the things that they're really mad about over there is that Jair Alexander wasn't on Justin Jefferson a lot. And that was by design by the Vikings. The Vikings, why would you give your best player to their best player? How about our best player against your rookie linebacker? We'll take that matchup instead. And Jair Alexander can cover KJ Osborne all day. And the way that they did that was with the use of like varied formations and motion. Especially the motion, you split him out wide and you motion him inside. Well, if you see Justin Jefferson splitting out wide in your defense, you go, okay, Jair Alexander, go get him. You're going to match up there. And then if he flips to the other side of the formation, he goes out wide over there, you might just have Jair Alexander follow him. But what if he goes into the backfield and he motions in to like an H-back formation or alignment, or he goes and motions in to be in line or into the slot or whatever? How many of those places will Jair Alexander follow? And then they didn't go with the full shadow, which they probably should have. So Jair Alexander just didn't follow. So that meant that the Vikings got to dictate the matchups, and that is the fatal mistake that the Packers made. They let the Vikings dictate the matchups. And that meant that there was a play where Preston Smith was manned up against him. That's a whoops. That's not supposed to happen. But you had a big catch against Darnell Savage. You had a couple of big plays against Quay Walker. You had big plays against Eric Stokes. This was not the way the Packers wanted that to go down. And that was, I think, part of why you saw such a big surge in that first half. And then I think I would guess that they did a better job of dictating those matchups, and they were a little bit less passive about it in the second half. But also game script and situation will sort of affect some of that. They just ran the ball a lot more in the second half. And so you're just going to see a little less, and that's okay because they won 23-7. I also want to talk about Kirk. And I will say one of the things that I thought would happen in this game was a lot of mistakes, and we did have some coverage busts. Again, put a pin in that, but we had some coverage busts. We had a couple of delay of game penalties just on like not having your sideline mechanics right, like people just not getting in and out of the huddle the way they were supposed to. And they ate a penalty with a guy not getting off the field in time. It was a decline penalty, but they gave Rodgers a free play with a 12th man substituting and not getting off the field in time. Those were the kinds of things I talked about earlier in the week where I was like, I'm worried that, week one, new regime, you're going to have some communication things. That's what communications things look like. And it's just that the Packers couldn't punish it as well as I thought they were going to be able to. And that's why I was wrong. I overestimated the Packers. I think like the thing I anticipated the Vikings doing happened. It just didn't hurt them as bad as I thought they would. And as much as I kind of knew Justin Jefferson, I mean, Jefferson is going to go off every game this year. I have all kinds of high expectations for Jefferson. I called him getting 2,010 yards on the Minnesota Football Party. But this was something else. This was, you don't predict 184. So I want to talk to you about Kirk Cousins a little bit too, because I thought he had a really nice game and he deserves a lot of praise. So we're going to get into that. But first, let me talk to you about daily fantasy. If you are like me and you don't like daily fantasy, Prize Picks might be for you. Prize Picks is just like 2 to 5 players. So you don't have to put together a whole team. You don't have to find the corner case. You don't have to be like, I think Kyler Murray will have a big game today. And I just kind of want to play with that. But now I'm sitting here thinking about if David Montgomery is good, or like kind of going through random budgeting, and like you're thinking about way more than you wanted to. And really, you just wanted to make a play on Kyler Murray. That's what Prize Picks is for. You pick 2 to 5 players, and if they will score more or less than their Prize Picks projection. So Patrick Mahomes, more than 320 passing yards or less than 320 passing yards, that kind of thing. You can also do this for all sorts of sports, NFL, WNBA, MLB. Those are the big ones out right now. But anything, MMA stuff, they've got ways to play with like disc golf, all sorts of crazy stuff if you really want to get degen about it. So download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. That's right. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks gives you $100. If you deposit $50, Prize Picks gives you $50. Don't forget to enter promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Should we talk about our old Kirky boy, our little Kirkster? Because he had a day. It was awesome Kirk day. So there's a couple things about Cousins that I noticed. Still really quick to get through things. There were a lot of checkdowns. That could be fine. I don't inherently have a problem with that until I can see what went on downfield. But I couldn't. So another thing to put a pin in. But it's not like the offense was conservative enough for this to be like a thing that needs explaining. And because Cousins was like pretty aggressive at times and found bigger plays, especially some of those shots to Jefferson that were so big, it makes me not my hypothesis going in is not going to be that there were a bunch of open people running around downfield. Now, I believe Arif Hassan said that there were, so I don't know. I'll check on it. But what I think I noticed there was intentional pocket movement. There's a Kwesi term for this that he said right when he got hired: thoughtful and intentional. And I really like that. There's nothing arbitrary. You're not just drifting, but you're finding a spot, you're trying to get to it. And that is something I've seen Cousins do like twice a year. And he did it twice in this game for big shots. I love that. That's really exciting. Like my biggest Kirk Cousins thing. And if you've been listening to the show, you know that like I've been really critical of him. But one of my biggest things was that he wasn't, not like that he wasn't, I don't need him to play schoolyard Josh Allen ball, but I do want him to find plays that are there instead of just going into your check down and living to fight another day, right? Like fight someday, find your play. And he found some plays that I don't think were like in the structure of the progression. The big one, the first big one to Jefferson, not the blown coverage touchdown, but the one before that, it was like a deep post and it almost set up, it was right after the goal line stand and it set up a field goal. That I don't think was where that was supposed to be in the progression, but there was a little pressure. He had to step up. He had to find a spot. And then he threw with anticipation. That's what is really exciting to me, that there were 2 safeties there horizontally bracketing Jefferson, and Jefferson was about to break hard outside. And that safety on the outside of him, the guy who should be responsible for that, had his hips turned the wrong way. And I don't think his job was actually that leverage, but when you're reading, you don't know what's what, right? But his hips were turned the wrong way, which tells you this guy can't run with Jefferson. He would have to stop his momentum, turn around, get going all the way the other direction. And Jefferson's already there. He doesn't have time to do that. But you're not going to see him streak open. And a lot of times Cousins would wait until he sees it and he wouldn't throw it with that anticipation. But this one, he heaved with anticipation and he heaved it way downfield. that's so exciting. You'd absolutely love to see it. And that was one where he like climbed way up the pocket, and that wasn't off of a perfect platform. Just because of the way that he was, I don't even really want to call it scrambling because it was more intentional than scrambling. It was really like moving and resetting, but just because of the timings of things, he couldn't fully reset and he was going a little bit too fast to reset. So he didn't actually step into that throw the way you usually would want to, and he still delivered the ball really way on time. That's just kind of a physical talent thing. You kind of have that or you don't. And Cousins always had. I mean, he's always had the ability to throw those off platform like that. And it's not consistent. He's had some really dumb ones off platform, but this certainly wasn't one of those. It was a great play, and it was really, really encouraging. Just like that one melted my face off. That was a dope play. And there were a lot more like that, but there were a lot of shot plays called. I think Kevin O'Connell was more aggressive than Kirk Cousins was. And like naturally that's going to happen, right? You're going to call 8 shot plays, and unless all of them are open, your quarterback's going to decline some number of them. So that's always going to be the case. But you could see a lot of play action shots were called. He was scanning for something downfield, unless you were at the game. And I'm recording this from a place I have not seen the tape yet. So I'm really anxious to look at what was there, what he was looking at, and what he did decline. But when he did take it, it was dope. There's just to find problems in this game from the Vikings, you have to work hard. You have to be well, there were some delay of games. Well, they had some coverage busts, then forced a punt. You have to work so hard. And that's a really great place to be. I want to resist the temptation to extrapolate this to the Vikings are winning the NFC North. But a lot of the models have, a lot of the 538s and ELO and predictive looking models have put the Vikings now as the odds-on favorite to win the NFC North, which is wacky, right? But even if this game is lying to us a little bit, let's say, the Packers just aren't that bad, and they'll turn it around. They always do. And are the Vikings truly this good? Well, we don't know. It's all 1 week, right? Could have just been a fluky one. We saw what happened to the Packers last year on week 1, and they pulled it together. But even if that does happen a little bit, even if it is lying to us, I think there's too much genuine signal in this game. This game wasn't fluky. You can tell when there's tipped passes and there's weird penalty calls and there's flukies. This game was pretty clean. They just did it well. They just played the sport well, and the Packers didn't, and that was kind of it. Maybe they just weren't on their best day, and we were on our best day, and maybe our future days won't be as good. But if a game like that is in them, the other games that are in them can only be so far away from that. That's what's exciting. And they're young in some places, and that will mean inconsistency, and so that's all okay. This is all me just being a wet blanket and throwing something on it. However, I think there's a reason that those models are giving the Vikings an edge now in the North. And a big one is that we currently have tiebreakers on the Packers. And the worst we can do now with the Packers is split the series. That's the worst that can go. That is going to help whether they are actually, in fact, better than the Packers on all 17 weeks of the season or not. That's a heck of an advantage to be in as we go in. And, of course, now we're a game ahead, too. So we're already sitting in that place in the standings. So next week is Philly. I do a lot more breaking down on Locked On Vikings than I do previewing. So tomorrow is going to be Twitter Tuesday. I'll answer whatever questions you got. I'm sure most of them will be about this game. So send me your questions at Locked On Vikings on Twitter or at Luke Braun NFL on Twitter. LockedOnVikingsPodcast@gmail.com is the email address if you'd rather send an email, or you can also fill out the Google form in the show notes. If you're on YouTube, leave a comment. I'll see it there. And I will answer your questions. And then on Wednesday, we'll get a little bit more nitty gritty with the film. And then Thursday is crossover Thursday. So we'll talk to Louie and Gino over at Locked On Eagles. That's going to be Thursdays on the show. And then Friday, we'll do a little bit more bona fide previewing. And then since it's a Monday night game, it'll be a little bit of a weird week next week. But that's the schedule, and that's the cadence here for the entire season. So I hope you guys come along with me. You can also find a whole bunch of stuff, tape breakdowns and more stuff on my Patreon, as well as the history documentary. So I hope to see you all over there as well. And as always, Skol.